So that Big Dipper and that circle behind behind it, excuse me, a lot of people thought it was the sun, but if you come over into Taoist teachings, it's about the original higher self. Now, how do you get there? You stop thinking. What stops you from thinking? Well, you can do it yourself to some point, or the magnetic hemispheres of your brain quit functioning into a zero magnetic field, and then you enter oneness again with the creator, and the download comes in instantly. This is what the elite are terrified of. So if you're wondering why the world's all scattered right now, this in a nutshell kind of sums it up. There's some sort of current that is flowing in, and if we hit a zero or declined magnetic field state coming up in 2024, just like this solar diagram here with the planetary geometry shows you, then Houston, we have a problem. At least the elites have a problem, because that'll be an instantaneous awakening of all of humanity at the same exact time on the same exact day. And welcome back. Glad you stayed with me. Exciting episode. If you like ancient history and you like modern economy and where our world is going to slam right in the middle with your access to funds being limited and rolled over into a digital rationing card, this show is for you. I'd like to start back a little bit further back in time, the Roman era. You know why 79 AD is the last time that the planets have lined up like they will in October of 2024. I'll bring you that slide as we move through the information here. Now, I think it's really integral to set this up as to why is everything happening now? You know, I've just kind of alluded to it or drip fed it in through the last, 2 months of shows here, but I really wanted to sit down this weekend, explain from my perception of understanding energetic flows across our spiral arm of the galaxy and how it affects our solar system, how a star's being affected, and it has been on cycles before. Elite understand the onset of this energy change. Now, for those of you unaware, back in 2020, we officially, quote unquote, entered into the age of Aquarius. A lot of people know that, the age of Aquarius, that old song, quite popular at the time. So it's called the water bearer, but it's kind of a misnomer because it's more of an air sign than anything. And I'm not going to go too woo, and I'm not really going to get into what you call the astrology of it all. I'm just trying to identify areas in space that have been mapped out by prior civilizations that they know the current flow from that area of space changes, and our star's affected, and then our Earth's affected because our magnetic fields run in tandem together. So this first slide here, the water bearer, like I say, we understand it as water bearer now, but it wasn't back during the Roman era. So what we're looking at here is Roman era stone carving, for a better term, depicting Aquarius. Now, when we look at it also on the right side, you'll see what looks like a series of lightning bolts or W's running next to each other. That is the actual sign for Aquarius. Now, for me, looking for energetic changes in our system here, in our regional star system, 4 or 5 light years away in the next closest stars, anything that would affect that connection between our sun and that star would be energetic. So then I'm looking at something directly related. Anywhere you go to a high voltage box, you see the same exact symbolism. Can't be coincidence. It's electrical. So we get these different depictions of pouring out of the waters. And as you can see, that Roman era for sure looks more like an energy wave to me than it does any type of water. Now, again, this type of information is masked but unmasked to those who understand it or can find the symbolism and decode that. They have to leave it out there. It's not going to be perpetually hidden. I mean, it's out there for others to understand it if you go down that route. Now, on the left side here, this was the former depiction. This is 1640-ish, I'm going to say 1630 to 1640 star map. So you notice through time, the style of it changes over, but it still retains the same core principle. So if we're going to say the pouring out of the waters, it really was depicted as a pouring out of the stars. But if we go back to the Roman era times, it was a pouring out of electrical current, and now somewhere in the 15 to 1600s, it shifted into a pouring out of actual literal stars coming out. Morgan Stanley warns commercial real estate is headed for a crisis worse than 2008. It's no longer a black swan, it's a flock of black swans. There's a banking crisis, commercial real estate, de-dollarization, rate hikes, and persistent inflation. BRICS is the hottest ticket in town, with an additional 19 countries looking to join and move away from the dollar. Mention the Adapt 2030 channel, you're going to get some first-class service. Patriot Gold Group offers the no fee for life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold or silver on qualifying rollovers. 888-546-7020. Call to get your free investor guide today. And now on with the video, which is interesting. And then again, if you try to match this all up together, it is the movement from what we understand as the fish. Remember Jesus Christ with the fish, that era coming into, at the birth of Christ, into this last 2,000 years of Pisces. That's why the fish was so represented. But you'll see the fish moves into the sign. So there's a change over into the next where we sit now, Aquarius in the star signs. But it's interesting, you have the electrical symbolism there and also the current symbolism coming out of that horn or the vessel pouring out. But, the star thing, I had an interesting conversation last night. What if it represents a heavier, denser region of space where there's going to be more space debris actually hitting our planet? Back in the 1880s, there was, they call it the night of the falling sky, where there were about 10,000 shooting stars per hour. Yeah, I said that right, 10,000 per hour. They could read newspapers by all the shooting stars coming down so frequently. That would have a huge effect in the atmosphere of more particulates, and they would be bouncing off sunlight. And lo and behold, 2 years later, they had really a difficult time growing crops. There was a lot of more moisture, more rainfall. So I'm going to bring up, this is 1860s to 1880s stylization of the same, what we saw before from the Roman era in the 1600s. Aquarius, again, that vessel's pouring out, but then we follow that river, perceived river. Now, why is it the only one in the entire zodiac that has a river associated with it flowing out? But where does the river terminate? Well, it terminates down in Pisces again, which is the era that we just left. So if you wide this out, Aquarius, the water bearer, we can follow that electrical current directly from Aquarius all the way straight into Pisces. All right, so they're mapping out a Birkeland current or a series of current flows for you already in the system. So as a controller, if you understood the flow of these currents and the way they would affect our star and then our magnetic field on the planet and the ability for humanity to grow food, you could control that or use it. And if you believe that resources we milked and consolidated in an area that wouldn't be so affected by this based on prior cycles, you might start to make sense of the world that seems so nonsensical at the moment. Now, if we go further back, these are into the 1630s stylized versions. You notice there's less clothing. Further back we go, 1500s, 1600s. Further we come into the Puritan movement, everything starts to get clothed. But it's very clean on these current flows where they're going into the mouth of the fish. So is it really going into the mouth or is it going into the eyes, is the question. So what I'm referencing here is electric universe Birkeland currents, these field-aligned currents that wrap around each other. We have a positive and negative charge, but as they start moving, they wrap in on each other, which allows the magnetic field to set in stage electrical current to flow across that field. And that's the strangest thing about our modern world, too. The electric company doesn't really deliver electrons to your house through the cables above your head. They set up the magnetic field for the electrons to travel down to arrive at your home. It's a bit weird. They don't shove current down a copper line. They allowed a wrapped copper wire to hold a magnetic field that then allows electric field to move down that magnetic field. They're intertwined. That's the whole thing. That's why I call it electromagnetism. They're intertwined. So when you look here, you see these constricting magnetic fields, and the tighter they get, the faster they move. And you'll find that stars bunch up on these in the galaxy as they're being formed. It's just the way the principle of our universe operates from micro to macro. And if you understand this single principle, you'll understand that what they have hidden back in the past in terms of knowledge long ago that was far more advanced. So this is, on the left is an actual nebulous Birkeland current photographed from Hubble when it was the best of the best, not the James Webb telescope. I'd like to revisit that one with James Webb to see the intricacies available with better optics, but they haven't targeted that area of space. I'm wondering why, because maybe it would really wrap in and you just see those two filaments. But again, when we come back to the this is 1830s, Carleton did this one, the stylized Birkeland current running from the tails of the Pisces constellation. Interesting in that. So now you start to map it up. In the original, it went into the eye. And now if you charge plasma currents high enough, you're going to get this same what is considered owl eyes in laboratory experiments. If you run the current high enough and the voltage at a high enough charge, they will turn into this eye formation here. It looks like owl eyes, literally. And it's all about currents. So the further back you go, the more it's targeted on the eye, which is interesting because that looks like owl eyes. In the 1600 star maps, the current went to the eye of the fish. Now again, yeah, that's coincidental, yeah. But then the star maps from the Chinese on the left side, they're showing you giant Birkeland currents running through what you consider the Milky Way. Now, you can't tell me that there's this many societies this far in the past that all understood current flows across our universe and our regional star systems here. This changes, our Earth changes because it's all interconnected electrically, electromagnetically. Now these filaments, they're going to be moving. They're not bound in completely solid rock solid. They're going to be moving, but as they move, they twist and loop and twist and loop. Now sometimes they'll be a little bit further apart, and that'll be a discharge current, and then sometimes they'll come closer together and you'll get an amplified current. But these two together, these two forces, they're wrapping on each other, you know, double helix like our DNA. It's the exact same thing. And, you know, I'll bring this a little, this is 1880s, this particular one, a little bit more colorized version. You can really clearly see where we are. Now this Birkeland current makes a lot more sense when you put these next to each other. They absolutely understood the pouring out of Aquarius led straight directly to Pisces, and this current goes directly through our solar system. Now, what is it out there, and how far back does this knowledge really go, would give us an indication of how many cycles have come and gone of this, either the 400 year or the 2000 year. We're presently targeting into a once in a 2000 year event here, coming up October of 2024. Now, if you go further back in Japanese lore and mystery, way back, we're talking about 4,000 years, they called it the fox. And it's the same thing. What do you see? The Birkeland currents represented in the tail, or the stylized version of the fox on the right is exactly what you saw with the pouring out of the water in slide number 1 next to the Roman era pouring out of the waters. Same, but different. They just use the fox to represent it with the tail versus having a vessel where something poured it out. But we're going back 4,000 years for this information. And what's so interesting on the left colorized slide of the fox, it shows a Birkeland current with side filamentary offshoots like you would see with dragon-esque feet running through the skies. But at the bottom, you'll see erupting volcanoes. And that crow there represents huge, gigantic sunspots. And if you go back in Chinese legend, the crow marching across the face of the sun was the end of our world as they knew it, because it was such a large hole in the sun or whatever it was that blast pattern came out, and they talk about oceans evaporating and the planet standing still for some time and then starting its spin again with massive floods. That's not too long ago. That's within, you know, the last 4,000 years of our history here. Not widely referenced in geological history, but so interesting how Birkeland currents are represented with increased volcanism and also changes in the sun with larger coronal hole streams, as well as sunspot activity itself. Now, realistically, with all this information looked at in a different perspective, it's really difficult to dismiss that from the past as into, it just was, dude, they didn't know anything. But how does that correlate to something about a year and a half from now? Well, if you go back to the Chinese, it's called the Beidou Qixing, and it's the Big Dipper cult. They actually had a full sect within the Taoist temples just to focus on the Big Dipper. Now, the reason was they understood that whatever the Birkeland current flowing out of that was a seed point for humanity, or human consciousness, as they call it. But that current flow coming out of that constellation, moving over into Aquarius, down through Pisces, and then reaching over into our own regional star system here. When that stopped, humanity dies out. There's no more consciousness because our star stops. It would go into a dwarf phase, and there would be not enough light for us on that plasma sheet to read and heat our planet. So they're tracing it back to the origination point of where does that first initial current flow come from, and where does it end up at our star here? So what's most interesting is when you start to overlay these things talking about magnetic field loss, or a zero magnetic field state. That's very possible in October of 2024. So that Big Dipper and that circle behind it, excuse me, a lot of people thought it was the sun. But if you come over into Taoist teachings, it's about the original higher self. Now, how do you get there? You stop thinking. What stops you from thinking? Well, you can do it yourself to some point, or the magnetic hemispheres of your brain quit functioning into a zero magnetic field, and then you enter oneness again with the creator, and the download comes in instantly. This is what the elite are terrified of. So if you're wondering why the world's all scattered right now, this in a nutshell kind of sums it up. There's some sort of current that is flowing in, and if we hit a zero or declined magnetic field state coming up in 2024, just like this solar diagram here with the planetary geometry shows you, then Houston, we have a problem. At least the elites have a problem, because that'll be an instantaneous awakening of all of humanity at the same exact time on the same exact day. Now, you might not think about it in that construct, but think about the hemispheres of your brain. They're magnetic, they're electromagnetic. If electromagnetic currents cease even for a few moments within our solar system, even if it's for 2 seconds, you're going to have 2 seconds of absolute zero thought. That's where that comes back into. You're going to tap something else. It is the great creator itself. That's what is going to be the universal force that will, and once you come back in and your magnetic fields of your brain reestablish themselves and you start to think again and you come out of that consciousness phase, you are going to think very differently at that point forward. You will no longer accept anything that we see on this planet. You will not. That is what's so terrifying. That's why there's so much scattered interference pattern and fear. But look at the diagram here. The last time we saw this was 79 AD. 79 AD was the last time this planetary geometry comes up. So if you're in the Earth and you're looking at it out perceived into the outer solar system, that will be a perfect square. Now, what happens when the Earth rolls to the center there? You can see we got Sun, Earth, and second magnetic field of the 4 gas giants interlooping on themselves. Now, if the current flow decreases during that time, the potentiality of electromagnetism is going to jump out to the other planets. Taking you back in history, Saturn used to be another brighter star in our solar system. If you go back 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, Jupiter and Saturn both glowed 50, 100x brighter than they do today. There were second suns within our solar system. This is what the myths and legends talked about. Chinese referenced it, Mayans referenced it, Anasazi referenced it, Cahokia referenced it. Doesn't matter where you go, it's been referenced time immemorial that something changes. And back to the last one here with the Chinese, they called it the Beidou Qixing, or the ruler. Once the mandate from heaven's removed from the emperor, then the dynasty collapses. Well, that's nothing more than a Birkeland current flow decrease that stops crop production on our planet. And because the emperor couldn't feed the people, they have no right to rule it. No right to rule. If you can't feed the people, you got no right to rule them. And that is, and I really believe that's one of the reasons that China's setting up the Belt and Road Initiative and the new Silk Road and the BRICS currencies, because they understand it's back again. They get it. It's back again. Now, for the last 4,000 years, they haven't been able, at least in our written records, to be able to overcome the sizable depletion in crop production that caused famines and riots across what is now known as China. So really, the way we look at it and the way I'm perceiving it as well, go back to 1640 through about 1680, and there was a massive event on our planet called the Maunder Minimum, and these dark blue areas are the areas that dropped fastest in terms of temperature, and the rainfall and precipitation patterns changed. There was mass famines like no food in these dark blue areas. So if I was if I'm an elitist, which I'm not, but if I were a ruler of a planet, and which I'm not, but if I was to look down and go, you know what, these blue areas, these are going to be trouble. We might as well cut the losses right now and just, move that wealth and everything to areas that we think might be better areas. So look over into the Middle East there. Think about the frankincense route, say circa 600 AD, rainfall massive. They're massive frankincense, what you consider plantations as far as the eye could see. The Marib Dam had flowed, it was 20-some feet deep for 100 miles in any direction. This is in the Middle East, by the way, 600 years, or 600 AD, excuse me, 1400 years ago. So Cut your losses. The financial system, you need to pull that wealth from these areas in dark blue and move it to areas that are in lighter blue or non-affected white zones. When I say white, that's probably like 0 degree to maybe half a degree Celsius. Anything that's dark blue, you're talking about 2C or about 4 to 5 Fahrenheit drop average temperature. Notice Greenland warmer during that time, Alaska warmer during that time, G. And then if we get a little bit better, a little ice age reconstruction here, we start to see Australia at the bottom, parts of South Africa, and over into South America. But predominantly it's going to be centered into areas more north, parts of Japan, Canada, United States, Russia, China. So they're trying to buck history and be the only time that they've ever outdone this. So a quick map here for you, dark blue equatorial, that'll be the best. The further north we go into those last bands where it's written Canada, actually in the word, anything above that will be a no-grow zone. Anything below it to the top of the United States, up in that last latitude, 45 north and above, shrinking production from this point forward. It's going to be 15 years of more shrinking production. And it'll be the exact same around in South America, parts of Australia. So when you start to look at through history and go, man, these repeating patterns are going to knock out crop production at the knees. And now there's all these excuses around the planet why crop production's failing. Oh, it's the Ukraine thing. Oh, it's the currency debasement. Oh, it's the BRICS thing. Or is it history in a repeating cycle? Should be more of the question. Because if you can't grow enough food, you certainly can't feed the world's population today either. I mean, we're at such a crux and crossroad right now. If our food prices double or triple, it's game over for our economies anyway. See, that's the thing. Misnomer is you got to go to the famine before the society's affected. It's not. You only have to come to incredibly rising food prices where it's unaffordable for people before the society comes crashing down. You don't have to have people laying of malnutrition like you saw in Africa in the Sally Struthers days years ago. You don't have to see that. Your food prices need to triple, and most people couldn't afford it. And again, everybody keeps talking, oh, the dollar never going to go away. You can't ever have a BRICS. I agree. I totally agree. But if there's a parallel currency that people will accept as payment, parallel, doesn't even have to usurp the dollar. Dollar doesn't have to go to zero. If there's a parallel payment system, 50-50, for example, dollar lost its dominance already. There is no coming back. The dollar has lost its dominance as the world reserve currency. The parallel system is chugging along and it's starting to roll faster and faster. So nothing really has to go to zero before an amplified effect actually twists and bends society. That's the misnomer, that one thing needs to go to zero before there's an effect. We are being affected probably at the 80% level. We're far from where we're going to go in this cycle. Now, be the rulers and the elite. You understand population decline's coming. There's famines inbound, can't grow the food. Now, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to cut your losses. You're going to move your wealth over to areas that are going to survive this on this map here. Where are those areas? Equatorial, obviously, Middle East areas, North Africa, a lot of different parts in Asia that can survive through this, Northern Australia perhaps. But the wealth's being moved, and what's being clipped? The Five Eyes. Oh, New Zealand, that's not going to survive. That's going to get really cold down there. Australia, there's going to be barely anything way up, maybe Cape York, you'll be able to grow some crops up there. South America is going to be nice. But everywhere you look across the Western Five Eyes, even Japan, that's not going to be that viable for crops. So as we come back from the second break, we're going to run into the economics and how this all dovetails. See you then.